I'd like to start this edition of 5 songs with a confession. With the first song we're talking about today, I am, or at least feel that I'm kind of cheating by the simple fact that it's Björk's homage to one of Brazil's most iconic and arguably the most tragic diva, Elis Regina. The strings in this song were arranged by one of my country's finest musicians, Elmir Deodato, whose melodies you may have heard in the works of Aretha Franklin, Frank Sinatra, and Kool and the Gang. My own mother's name is just a letter away from the O of isolation of the song's protagonist. Today, we're talking about the 7th track in 1995's Post, Isobel. Inspired by the lush, mysterious harmonies of Brazilian music, the magic realism of Latin American authors such as Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and a moth that wouldn't leave her color, later becoming one of the song's most enduring images, Isobel is Björk making a mythology of herself through song, a woman who, as much as modern technology may fascinate her, the solace and sovereignty she finds in nature is still what captivates her the most. A theme that will repeat itself in the Icelandic artist's work for years to come. In her own words, given in an interview for Pulse magazine in 1995, Isobel is about a girl who was born in a forest, and she was not born from a mother and a father, she was born from a spark. And she grows up and becomes a woman, and as she grows up, she realized that the little pebbles and rocks on the forest floor are actually baby skyscrapers. So as she grew up, the rocks grew up and became skyscrapers, until she finds herself in the middle of a city as a fully grown woman. She's not a real person, she's more like a myth, like Atlas represents strength and Neptune is the god of the ocean. She represents intuition. An anecdote from François Nemeta, Michel Gondry's assistant director for the song's music video, reinforces the half-autobiographical, half-self-mythologizing character of Isobel. Although she was given the option to stay in a chic hotel in the city nearest to the video's forest, Björk preferred to set up camp in the hotel's garden. Maybe she did intend to stay in the forest, but her crew wouldn't let her. Anyhow, Isobel serves as a perfect introduction to Björk's artistry, a beautiful demonstration of her and her collaborators' capacity to unite musical textures both antique and futuristic, the perfect background for the mature naivete that she embodies, the fantastical worlds of moss and microchips living in harmony that she wants to will into existence through sound and image. One can only imagine what was going on mentally and emotionally with Björk between 1996 and 1997. As her status as pop music's most daring innovator started to rise, so did the unwanted attention from the press and fans. And it all came to a horrifying climax when, in September of 1996, a sulfuric acid bomb was sent to the artist's house by obsessed Uruguayan-American fan Ricardo Lopez, who would later on take his own life away on camera as the last act of his video diaries. When one listens to Homogenic, released around 1 year after that traumatic incident, it may be easier to connect the self-assured attitude of a song like Bachelorette as Björk's way of putting her foot on the ground and proclaiming "this is who I am and nothing's gonna change that." However, the romanticism of the second track of the album, Yoga, can also be read as an act of defiance in the face of terror, but through love. Not as eros, but love as a total state of being in the world. Although recorded in Spain and sung mostly in English, Homogenic is the first of many albums in which Björk makes her Icelandicness a vital component of her musicality. In an interview conceded to David Hemingway, she stated that as she crafted Yoga, she really had a sort of national anthem in mind. Not the national anthem, but certain classic Icelandic songs, very romantic, very proud. And the national romanticism at play in the song is completely unbridled in its soaring strings, arranged by Björk herself, once again with the help of Elmir Deodato, heavily inspired by the folk melodies of her homeland and played by the Icelandic string octet. In stark contrast, As Iceland is known as the land of ice and fire, Mark Bell's raucous beats emulate the volcanoes and geysers that bring the warmth of the nation's landscapes, the landscapes that color Björk's imagination ever since she was a young girl, and that, in the aftermath of her assassination attempt in London, must have brought her some degree of homesickness. While its simultaneously old-fashioned and forward-thinking sound served as an homage to her nation's geography and musical ancestry, its title refers to Björk's masseuse and best friend. Given her role in Björk's life, one can imagine how important the confidence shared between the two must have been in face of such a traumatic experience as what happened in September of 1996, that quite literally pushed the artist into a state of emergency, making her re-evaluate everything she might have taken for granted. Jóga is a transmutation of the exhilarating grief she experienced into a grateful prayer for all that made Björk the woman she is, her homeland and those closest to her, resulting in one of the most universal love songs ever made. Very few pieces of art are able to express the redemptive power of intimacy and eroticism in one's life better than Björk's fourth and finest album, Vespertine. In interviews, she described the LP as Homogenic's introverted twin, an album that expresses the moment when you have the patience to pick up a book. In fact, its working title was Domestica, and it was supposed to include a track called Lost Keys, featuring the album's fusion of microbeats and trebly instruments imitating the mundane sounds of a household. For me, what Vespertine's crystalline, delicate, fairy-like musical aesthetic represents is the fantastical joy of being one with your lover in the sanctum of your own home, when the public's eye is nowhere to be seen and you can drop down all pretense of being anything but themselves. Unison, the album's closer, is the apotheotic moment when any remaining emotional safeguards can be discarded, the full embodiment of the utopia for two that romance can be. However, the two main sources of inspiration for the album couldn't be more contradictory, or maybe mutually complementary. In one hand, Vespertine is the hobby to Dancer in the Dark's day job, a film and soundtrack production marred in creative and personal disputes with Danish filmmaker Lars von Trier. In the other hand, the writing and recording of Vespertine coincided with the early stages of the Icelandic artist's relationship with American filmmaker and visual artist Matthew Barney, a figure we will return to later in this essay, but for very different reasons. Unison isn't a mere plea for two lovers to unite tonight, but in a way, it's the sound of Björk making amends between her emotional self-sufficiency, a woman that thrives best with a beard and a pipe and a parrot on each side, similar to Isobel, and her desire for the generous palm stroke of her newly found lover. The double-edged sword that is maleness is another factor to consider, given that she's been shown both sides of it. It reared its ugly, oppressive head in Trier's mistreatment, but also showed its gentle, nurturing side during the early stages of her relationship with Barney. At the end of the day, she chooses to be in the hands of the gardener, the discipliner, obeying all of his rules to find that she can still be. This may be the single most idyllic vision of romance ever committed to tape. In the current historical moment, marked by the widening of the gulf that separates men and women, a song so vulnerable hits an emotional spot in me like no other. It isn't just a beautiful love song, it makes me want to rethink how I deal with intimacy, something I still have some serious issues with. If the last chorus of the song doesn't reduce your body to shivering tears, no matter how much you may think yourself as emotionally independent of the opposite sex, you may need to check your own heart. In a previous installment of my 5-song series, I talked about Radiohead's True Love Waits and the quiet transformations the song went through over the course of 21 years. I reached the conclusion that I wish I understood that song better, or that maybe I didn't. And for better or for worse, this is the same conclusion I have reached with Björk's 8th album, Vulnicura. It's obviously a masterpiece, but due to my inexperience with divorce, as much as I empathize with the anger and sorrow so poignantly expressed through the LP, I just don't fully understand it. But I should at least try to. I don't think I've ever heard an album, and as much as I love him, that includes Bob Dylan's Blood on the Tracks and Marvin Gaye's Hear My Dear, that portrays with such intricacy the emotions of not only falling out of love, but of having your entire life upended by the disruption of the familial structure whose architecture you were fundamental on creating. The only piece of art I can justifiably compare it to is Ingmar Bergman's 1973 miniseries Scenes from a Marriage, a portrait of conjugal union so bleak that, around the time of its original airing, some blamed it on the increasing the filing of divorce papers throughout Europe. As stated by Björk in an interview, in Vulnicura, each song represents a certain moment and place after the finalizing of her divorce from Matthew Barney. In the case of Black Lake, the artist's longest ever track at 10 minutes and 8 seconds, it was written 2 months after the fact whilst jet-lagged in Japan, sleeping on the daytime and awaking during the night. This song is maybe less about a vast and open emotional landscape like so many others in her repertoire, but something more akin to an emotional backroom, liminal, eerie and oppressive, masterfully expressed by the fermatas between each verse, expressing the inexpressible. The artist's vocal performance isn't filled with intense belting or technicolor melismas, but a rather minimalistic portrayal of a scorned woman at the end of a rope, a rough co-painting made sound. This is Björk at its most vulnerable and diaristic. To better understand it, we can divide it in 6 distinct parts. Prologue. Accompanied by a barren string arrangement, Björk describes her heartbreak as a not mere meta but overtly physical matter, something also expressed in her body language in the Andrew Thomas Wang directed video of the song. Act 1. Emotional backrooms. The strings become more elaborate in its melodies, and a discrete beat by Arca, heavily inspired by the late Mark Bell, enters the scene. The descriptions of heartbreak gain a more geographic nature. Act 2. Confrontations 1. The beat becomes slightly more detailed and at times more pulsated, even industrial techno-like, as Björk confronts the indiscretions of her former husband, asking the most heartbreaking question one can make: did I love you too much? Act 3. Confrontations 2. Björk defends herself from refutations we will not speculate about. She counterattacks them, accusing her ex of abandoning their family. Act 4. The Abyss. With a rise in BPM, lending more intensity to both the strings and the beat, Björk becomes culpable of the same apocalyptic obsessions she accuses Barney in Confrontations 1, throwing herself deep into a void of pessimism and self-pity, feelings that blocked her from showing the composition to her friends and collaborators in the early stages of the production of Vulnicura. Act 5. The Escape. The BPM is still high, but the beat is sparser against the weeping strings. There's a feeling of slight exhilaration in the prospect of finally eloping the grim predicament she found herself in. As I stated in the beginning, I wish I could explain this song better, but going any further from here would risk this essay becoming even more immature than it already is. Even when we break down Black Lake bit by bit, if you're not equipped emotionally to deal with such a heartbreaking piece, a lot will be missing. So it's best we move on to the last and final song we'll be talking about today, the perfect contrast to the bleakness of Vulnicura. Conceived during the Vulnicura period, but more adequate for its successor, 2017's aptly titled Utopia, in its pastoral flutes, The title may be a nod to Arvo Pärt's double concerto of the same name, and its lyrics may be inspired by Nietzsche's Sins of the Father. Tabula Rasa works as a plan for the reconstruction of the utopia of the possible, that is the family structure. A half-warning, half-benediction from Björk to her and Matthew Barney's daughter, Isadora. After destroying the icon, the arson of all that was built between Björk and Matthew Barney, Tabula Rasa is a real but optimistic gazing towards the future and what it may hold. 30% severe and 70% tender. Even if new mistakes are made, Björk shows hope that her daughter and possible future grandchildren will show more accountability with those they choose to be with and, most importantly, with themselves. If a diary of destruction that was Funicura made Vespertine look childish and mature for a brief minute, Utopia reaffirms the mission statement that's been driving Björk's music from her early days. That a new, better world is possible, and it doesn't start with some grand political statement about the environmental crisis, Gaza, or the patriarchy, but rather in the way we treat the ones closest to us day in and day out. It may not always be sweet words and gentle caresses all the time, but even when it shows its tough side, love can be a total state of immersion. Amidst a world that grows more helpless and cynical with each day, maybe this is the last dream we can hope towards materializing. I don't think Björk herself would necessarily agree with me, being the utopian that she is, but at the end of the day, besides her insatiable desire to unite the past and present into one singular moment through music, this may be the most fundamental aspect of her legacy as an artist.